Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, all attendees, wherever you happen to be in the world. Thank you for joining this session. As Alicia was reading out my bio there, I realized that it was probably written a few years ago because it's actually, unfortunately, rather more than 30 years since I started in this wonderful industry. So yeah, I'm going to be taking you through a bit of some perspectives about test automation for SuccessFactors, the WorkSoft approach and so on. But I just wanted to, I've highlighted with a little red asterisk down here, 21st of November 2019. I was doing a little bit of digging about this date just for this session. I'm a bit of a kind of a history of IT buff, having been in it for more than 30 years. And I read that actually on this day, 50 years ago, the very first kind of permanent link was put in place on something called the ARPANET between Stanford Research Institute and UCLA. And the ARPANET went on to become what we know today as the modern internet. It was the foundation for that. So effectively 50 years ago today was the founding link in the internet, the technology that we're all now using to participate in this webinar, and perhaps more of relevance, the technology that so many of you, it seems, are either using or will be using to consume SAP SuccessFactors over the web, over the internet. So, you know, happy 50th birthday to the internet as of today. So just a little bit of trivia. If you go away with no more than that, I hope the rest of it is actually very useful, but at least you've learned that today is the 50th birthday of the first physical link on the internet. So let's get on with the actual subject of this session. I'm going to be talking about why there is such a prevalence of SAP SuccessFactors, why it's coming about, why it's important, why people are adopting it. I'm going to go on and talk a bit about then, well, why test it? And there's some interesting perspectives around often why are you testing it? It's a software application delivered as a service from the cloud. Who tests that? So we'll be talking about testing. I'm going to talk about WorkSoft's approach to supporting automated testing in a SuccessFactors implementation and in an ongoing SuccessFactors environment. I'm going to give you some demonstrations of some of the capabilities, and then we'll open it up for question and answer at the end. So hopefully that meets with everyone's expectations for this session based on the title. So we are seeing, obviously, more and more organizations adopting SAP SuccessFactors to do core HCM as part of typically a modernization strategy. And various organizations that, if you go and read some of the research on this, I think there was a recent Deloitte piece of research that said something like 50, I think at least 50% of the organizations that they'd surveyed were going through some form of HR/HCM modernization, and it is seen as a bit of a springboard for a transformation within the organization. It's both, I love this quote from Forbes, it's both a catalyst but also a participant in this transformation to a digital environment that so many organizations are now on. And part of the reason for that is this desire to be able to effectively adopt and retain the top talent, the kind of people that an organization wants working for them. So they're transforming the way that they engage with people right from the point at which they're attempting to recruit them into the organization and screen them through that organization, bringing them on board, keeping them there, but keeping them there by building a place of work and an environment and a set of technologies that make it easy to work there and engaging and rewarding to be working in these types of organizations. So that's why one of the main reasons that there's this upsurge in this whole modernization of HCM is it is a market for people applying for jobs at the moment, depending which sort of end of the organization you're looking at. We read stories about places like Walmart jobs at Walmart being oversubscribed compared to places at Ivy League universities and so on. So there's both ends of the spectrum, but for organizations trying to bring on talent, they want to bring on the very best people, and that starts with the way they engage with them when they bring them on board. So they've got those targets of actually, how do we bring on board and then retain the best people? A couple of other surveys, well, not quite a survey, the Steve Jobs Apple is a quote by Steve Jobs there himself. But the idea is, yes, we need to be recruiting the absolute best people, but not just getting the best people on board, keeping them there when they are there. How do we go about giving them a rewarding environment in which to work? As we said, SuccessFactors forms now part, and there are other HCM technologies, but SuccessFactors forms part of that kind of draw for people in terms of how they're engaged. And I've been, anyone who's paid any attention to my, well, 30 years in the IT industry kind of gives away roughly where my age is. My picture gives it away as well. But I've worked in numerous companies in IT where when you were onboarded, I applied for a job by finding the job posted in a newspaper, sending off my CV, my resume, and then hoping to hear back from them, getting the job. Onboarding involved coming in on day one and being given a desk and a phone, and there was no IT infrastructure in those days. Now I'm seeing an increase, particularly on LinkedIn. I'll often see colleagues of mine from past companies sharing what great onboarding packs they've been given when they've joined organizations. This is all part of this, getting the right people in, keeping them, making it good for them to be there. Turns out there's even companies that are now springing up that make these onboarding packs, and it's tech. It's people who get their phone, they get their iPad, they've got the notepads, the merchandise of the company. They're making it a really, really cool place to want to go and work. Another thing I've seen more interesting, in fact, I saw it this morning. I was at the airport in London very early this morning, driving along the perimeter road, and there's normally the signs up for the digital signs up for the car parks and how full they are and how many spaces there are. And until recently, there was a number of staff car parks at London Heathrow Airport. This morning, as I drove past, I noticed that they are no longer staff car parks, they're now colleague car parks. So there's this move to treating the people that work in an organization very, very differently. They're no longer staff. They're not even assets, is now almost a frowned upon phrase. They're the colleagues. And I've seen it when I myself go to meetings at some of our customers, we will be introduced as the colleagues from WorkSoft. And I enjoy that. That feels like we are part of that organization, part of the partnership and the team there. But it's a definite move to changing the way the colleagues, the people employed in an organization are perceived and rewarded and encouraged to stay there. So this is what's going on in an organization. Why does SuccessFactors help there? Well, it helps with a number of things. It's a very engaging experience. Organizations today will be recruiting everyone from sort of the baby boomer generation all the way down to millennials, and we've got people who grew up never experiencing the internet and were the first people to ever experience technology, the web, through to people who have grown up basically knowing the internet, knowing apps on a smartphone, and expecting to work in that kind of fashion, have engaging ways of dealing with things and simple ways to do things, instant gratification through being able to do something on their phone while on a train, whether that's file an expense report or request a day's leave. These things shouldn't get in the way of the colleagues being able to do their day-to-day activities. And technologies like SAP SuccessFactors, like some of the other SAP platforms, go a long way to providing that engaging experience that just stops these things getting in the way of people doing their job. For the people who need to use these kinds of technologies to do their job, it's a great and simple way to actually do it. It actually simply accelerates what they do. So in terms of a platform, it's a fantastic platform for doing that. I'm not here to sell SuccessFactors. It's just what we're seeing as we're talking to customers about that. So SuccessFactors itself is just obviously one technology that forms part of the kind of the portfolio of modern digital technologies that form, again, part of this new hybrid digital core platform that SAP are producing. And perhaps I should have put an additional polling question out at the start, that also to find out how many of the attendees on the session are existing SAP core HR on ECC, the stuff over on the left here, and are moving to the S/4HANA and the SuccessFactor based environment, because this is a journey that for most organizations, SAP want them to go on. They want you to adopt the new digital core platform, S/4HANA, and all of the ancillary technologies around it. But it's not a journey that's going to be quick and easy for anyone who's already there. It's not a journey that's quick and easy for someone who's just adopting SAP SuccessFactors without having any SAP history. So there's an evolution of the technology, but over time, this is a lengthy period that people will be going through in terms of transitioning from one of these platforms to the other. The key thing is, the majority of this stuff is a mixture of, there's some on-premise technology, but there's also, as SuccessFactors is a good example, there are some cloud-delivered technologies that also has to integrate into this core part of the platform. So some different dynamics in the way that this platform is delivered and therefore sort of managed and thought about within an organization. So that adds some additional sort of complexity to it. This is actually a slide that I've borrowed from an event that took place earlier this year. It was an SAP Insider event. It was HR Innovations 2019. I think it was in Vegas in March, I think just before SAP Sapphire over in Orlando. And this was just the SAP kind of product manager for SuccessFactors and HCM talking about the direction, the investment directions that SAP themselves are taking for SuccessFactors. The number down here in the bottom left for HCM within ERP probably doesn't come as too much of a surprise to anyone who's already on SAP. There is this 2025 deadline looming where SAP are saying that they will be ending support for core ECC, and that involves the HCM platform running on ECC. So we know that that's coming. But perhaps what's of interest here is that there is very little investment being made into any innovation within that existing part of the platform over on the left. All eyes, all investment, all dollars are being pointed at SuccessFactors as the place to go. And SAP are keen to have as many of their customers move to that environment as quickly and as early as possible. So the kind of parting summary of the session, the overall summary was that there's 15,000 SAP customers using core HCM within the ECC side of the platform. SAP want to accelerate and ease that move over to the digital, the new HR in SAP SuccessFactors. So great. However, there are some implications that come with doing that, and we're going to go on and discuss some of those in a moment. And as I said, the title of this session is about the value of test automation for SuccessFactors. But I don't hear you say, because you're all on mute, but I often hear some people say when we're in meetings talking about these cloud delivered applications, why do we need to test them? We're having technology and functionality delivered to us by a vendor here. We've paid them significant money for the right to use this technology. We're paying them to basically provide us technology that works, and therefore why should we test it? And it's a question that does come up, and this is a question that's come up for this lady here. This is Beatrix Kirst, who, I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but she's basically works for the German airline group Lufthansa. She leads their HR IT renewal program. This is Beatrix presenting at Sapphire in Orlando back in April, and she's made a point of singling this out as something she gets asked regularly. Why test a cloud app? Why are you? So this is her colleagues, some of her seniors, asking her why are we investing in testing a cloud app? It's delivered. Surely we just use it and it works. And there's some points on her slide there, but she's clearly highlighting the fact that no organization is the same. There's core data that exists within these environments, which are sensitive, private in nature in some cases. The rules and configurations about why different people might be able to view different parts of the data will vary from organization to organization, and within Lufthansa Group will vary from one part of the organization to another, where they have different employment laws in different countries where they have bases and staff working. So there is a lot of work that and effort goes into success factors at the Lufthansa group in terms of making it work for them and incorporating all the variants. So they genuinely have to test that to ensure that it provides at least as a pure minimum, the data privacy and security that they need it to provide in all the different regions in which they're deploying it. So it's a large challenge for them. We'll come on and talk about it a bit more. So there is the need to test just purely from that kind of perspective as well. But let's talk about another source of change. The change that, let's go back one actually, the change that Frau Kirst is talking about here is stuff that is being implemented in a very agile manner by their SuccessFactors implementation partner. They are constantly making configuration, role-based permission changes to meet the needs of the various Lufthansa operating groups and regions. And that is an ongoing, it is an agile environment. They're working in sprints, so those changes are happening constantly, and therefore they need to be testing constantly to ensure that as those changes progress up through their various instances of SuccessFactors, those things behave in the way they expect, and they're not opening themselves to any issues in terms of data. That's one source of a need to test. Another is just purely the fact that these applications themselves do change. Their functionality changes. There are bug fixes, there are performance improvements, there are enhancements and new features. This is a graphic that we at WorkSoft put together just to kind of visualize the kind of level of change that we're seeing being driven out of, in this case, just some of the SAP companies like SuccessFactors, Concur, Ariba, Hybris, etc. So the inner concentric rings represent the number of changes that these platforms push into their customers' environments on an annual basis. So you can see SuccessFactors 4 times a year, Concur 12 times a year. So, you know, there's a lot of change coming about from the technology vendors themselves. And if you think about it, this is almost a parallel to kind of the waterfall type approach to development and testing. You might have a quarterly release in which you're doing your regression testing of that quarterly release. And as an organization, historically you've been in control of when those releases happen, when the testing happens. You can align your resources, ensure you've got everything prepared in terms of data and system refreshes. In this case, these are technologies that are delivered to you through that thing that is 50 years old today, the internet and the web. And as an organization, if you're adopting these technologies, you've lost control of when these changes happen. You know when they happen, and we'll come on and look at that in a moment, but you don't have the control over when these things happen. So this was the calendar for changes for SuccessFactors in the year we're currently in. 4 releases a year in 2019. There's the concept of a preview and a production release. The idea being that the changes that SAP SuccessFactors are going to push out, they drop into what they call their preview instance that each customer can sign up for and license and use. And you've then got a 4 to 5 week period in which to test out and ensure that what's going into the preview still works for you. You've not got to make any additional configuration changes before SAP drop into your production instance the final release on this date in the right hand column. So you can see at the moment we're in the sort of preview period for the Q4 2019 release of SuccessFactors. December the 6th, that will drop into production for every SAP SuccessFactors customer that has the technology globally, and you will have adopted it pretty much without you having to lift a finger. In practice, you would hopefully have been testing in the preview period since November the 8th to make sure that everything works as you expected it to, and will continue to work after the production drop on December the 6th. I can almost guarantee that there are SuccessFactors users out there who do not appreciate that this kind of process goes on, and some of them on December the 6th will be scratching their head working out why their SuccessFactors environment isn't behaving as they expected it to, without having realized that actually this change happens, and it happens constantly, and it's out of your control. So the importance of being able to test in this preview window is paramount. Now, quite interestingly, this is the 2019 calendar. Just a few small weeks ago, I can't remember, within the last month, we heard from, or it was presented at a session, Solid, I think was the name of the session, excuse me, that based on feedback, they're going to scale back or take their foot off the throttle in terms of the numbers of changes that are being deployed. And SAP are actually going to move to 2 releases a year. I've highlighted here the word test. I expect a lot of the feedback was from customers that they could not keep up with the rate of change 4 times a year for something that's pushed on you, and that they needed more time to get things aligned and be ready to adopt those changes. So for next year, for anyone on this who didn't know that this was happening on this, and you're on this webinar, here's your dates for next year. Be ready on April the 10th to be doing testing of your preview release before it gets dropped into your production environment on May the 15th. So just another source of change. You've got changes that your implementation partners are making to configure SuccessFactors for your environment. You've got SAP SuccessFactors themselves making changes on a quarterly this year, biannually next year basis. You've got to be able to deal with those. But then, you know, this isn't a technology that exists in isolation within your companies and your technology landscapes. Talked earlier about the transition, the move from ECC to S/4HANA and SuccessFactors. That's a multi-year type process that organizations will be going through, a program of work, and people and organizations rather will have feet in both camps. They'll have technologies that intersect and integrate and overlap with SuccessFactors while they go through this move, but they will also have technologies that exist alongside and are integrated into SuccessFactors. So along the bottom here, we've got an example of a kind of typical end-to-end business process that you might see within an organization to do any number of different things. So let's think of something like recruitment through to hiring. These processes involve multiple people. Even within something like just SuccessFactors, there will be multiple people involved in a process of doing recruitment to hiring. But when you look at things like payroll systems being in core HR within ECC, then you're going to have integration between the two there and another role involved in that. It might be that your expense system is completely a third party, and therefore there is integration. Can I onboard someone? Can they fill in? Can they file an expense report? We need to test that our business processes that in some way either start, end, or pass through the technology that is changing, in this case SuccessFactors, also continues to work. So this end-to-end business process view is just another kind of dimension of testing that we see and our customers see as being important when they're adopting SAP SuccessFactors into their environment. So what are WorkSoft's customers testing? Let's take a look at that. Let's use some examples. This is, if you're familiar with Best Run, which is SAP's kind of sample organization they use for doing SuccessFactors training. They have within their organization Tessa. She's a recruiting manager. Now, probably goes for any colleague, not employee, but as a recruiting manager, in this case, Tessa, in theory, would only be able to view the compensation details about herself, any other sensitive information about herself, maybe some information about candidates and her reports, but presumably there would be restrictions in place for Tessa being able to see those sensitive information about other members of her team, her colleagues, and therefore the role-based permissions capability within SuccessFactors has to be tested that those kind of rules are applied, should be able to and should not be able to need to be tested as regularly as you are changing the configuration and the settings within SuccessFactors for those kinds of things. So that's one example of the kind of authorization type testing. We've got Jada within Best Run. She's a hiring manager, so this is more of a functional type testing requirement. Jada actually needs to be able to create a job requisition. That's the role she performs, is create job requisition so that someone can be hired into those positions. That's part of her role. So from a functional perspective, we need to be able to test that the permissions and authorizations that a user of Jada's role has is able to create a requisition successfully, and so on through the various bits of functionality. Let's take that a level up. Best Run itself, the company, or at least the HR part of Best Run. Across the organization, multiple people have different functional items they need to perform, creating requisitions, hiring an employee, onboarding someone. All of these people have a role to play within the organization, and their roles and their functions need to be tested, but it's important to test them as part of this end-to-end process. In this case, recruit to hire. Different people involved, different privileges, different functionality, integration points. So Stephanie over on the right here, who onboards the employees, someone who's going to be a HR specialist in ECC rather than SuccessFactors. So multiple roles, multiple technologies, multiple integrations, and that's just for a single process. So we need to be able to sort of test this in its end-to-end form as well as the individual components to test out, can Best Run as an organization, or your organization, can it operate with SuccessFactors? Can it deliver on, in this case, a recruit to hire process? So they're the kinds of testing scenarios we see, and we're going to go on and demonstrate some of these in a moment. So let's talk about the WorkSoft platform and why we are suited to working in this environment. And this is the SAP is SAP landscapes are an environment that WorkSoft has been providing automated testing capabilities and technologies for many years. SuccessFactors is just another of these technologies that kind of we've brought into the fold and are able to automate and test as part of those end-to-end processes. But our platform tends to fall into several key areas. One of them is what we call the discover part of the platform. If you think in terms of the HR environment, there are people, the likes of the Jadas and the Stephanies in Best Run, who know how to do their job and their functionality, perform the activities they need to do within their organization. They're not necessarily QA experts, they just know how to do the job they need to do. Someone who's a quality assurance expert who wants to build test automation doesn't necessarily understand what Jada's role involves, or Stephanie's or Tessa's role, or any other member of the organization. So what we want to do is make it incredibly easy for those people who know their job function well and how they use the applications to impart the knowledge they have, the knowledge they have about how they operate with the technology, impart that into the automation part of the platform. So we'll see something we call discovery, giving the users a simple way to basically turn what they do into documentation and automation in a very, very simple manner. Automation is really the core of the WorkSoft platform. This is where we take what those users have contributed to us as automation assets, we refine them and we make them robust and repeatable so that they can run over an extended period of time. They're parameterized so they can test for different data conditions and other sorts of conditions, verifications and so on. We do that, and then we make that automation available to be deployed and used as and when needed. So whether that's integrating it into a DevOps pipeline, setting it up for a schedule for a regular overnight regression test, we're making the automation available to be called upon and used as and where it's needed. Then ultimately report on that, provide feedback, reporting for often sort of compliance or regulatory type reporting on, yes, we've tested everything. We can assure our regulators or our compliance board that the data that we have, for as an example, within our SuccessFactors environment is secured as we expect it to be, and there's no possibility for the people who shouldn't see data to be able to see data and so on. So that's the idea behind the platform, is make it very easy for people to produce automation, execute automation, and use that automation where it needs to be used. This is kind of the same thing in a slightly more visual view. Take the business user, get them to walk through their activity. So rather than calling them in for a workshop type activity where we sit them down and say, okay, how do you do this? Please talk you through. We're going to document what you do. We're going to interview several colleagues and work out what the process really looks like. We just ask them simply to sit down in front of what we call our capture engine, which you'll see in a moment, and to walk through their activity. And that gives us some key outputs, some useful outputs. The important one from this webinar's perspective, I guess, is automation. It gives us an automated version of that user's activity that we can then refine and refactor. But it also gives us some process knowledge in terms of process analytics and visuals, and also high fidelity documentation of that process with no effort on the part of the user. Moving on, we obviously take that, we make that available, we publish it so that it can be used wherever it needs to be used and run to provide those continuous testing or regular regression in the preview to production window of SuccessFactors, to basically give an organization the confidence that you have tested all of the things you need to test to be sure that SuccessFactors within your environment is functioning as you expect it to and is suitable for use by end users. So let's look at an example demonstration here. We're going to look at we're going to use Jada here, Jada the hiring manager. And Jada's user story here is, as a business user, she wants to be able to digitize and document. By digitize, we mean turn what she does as a user into an automated asset. She wants to be able to do that so we can easily get automation. So we're going to go and show an example here. So let me switch windows. Let's go here. And typical, my session has expired, so let me quickly log back in as Jada. So I'll take on the role of Jada here. And what we wanted to do is create, we're going to, I clicked the wrong home button, didn't I? Apologies. So we've got our SuccessFactors environment here. We're logged in as Jada. Jada is going to go through what we call a capturing process. Very simple. We place a lightweight piece of technology out on the desktops of a number of the key users. We call it capture. And we just simply ask Jada to walk through her activity, bookending that walkthrough with beginning and ending the capture. So in this case, I'm going to start the capture. And then once it's started, I'm just going to walk through the activity that we've asked Jada to perform in this case. So it's going to be, in this case, we're going to go to the recruiting module, and I'm just going to do a simple example of creating a new job requisition as one sort of simple functional example. So click on the Create New button. We're going to do a standard job requisition. Let's create one from a blank template. We're going to call this demo user for webinar, for example. The hiring manager is Jada Baker. Click on the next button. I think I have to click through and fill in a few more fields after this. So we're waiting for SuccessFactors. Yeah, the company, let's just fill in a few of these. So best run and the location. I'm just going to select the first one that comes up, which I think is Boston. And let's then go down and create this requisition. Again, we're waiting for a response from the application. Click the Create Requisition. And that's typically, my job as taking on the role of Jada here is to walk through that scenario of creating a job requisition for this position. While I was doing that, the capture engine, which we see here now, again, was actually I use the term monitoring. It was observing the interactions that I was having with the application, in this case SuccessFactors, and was providing me with a step-by-step breakdown of, for the various screens, what I was doing. So for example, if I go to the Create New Job Requisition activity here, we'll see documented within the capture engine what I did. I clicked the standard job requisition, create a new job requisition. Jada Baker was the hiring manager, and so on. Let's expand out the next screen. So the options that I selected and then finally clicked the Create Requisition. So this has captured what the business user was doing with the application as a sequence of steps with a narrative that describes what those steps were. You'll also see possibly here, slightly small, but there's some screen snippets here of the various objects that I interacted with as I was going through this. So having done this, very simple for me, I've ended the capture. I now just need to send this into what we call the discovery part of our platform, Analyze. So let me authenticate here. And this is going to go off to Analyze. posted into the platform. And really my job as Jada here in terms of imparting the knowledge about how I work and how I use, in this particular example, how I do a create requisition is done. So I'm just going to tidy up Jada's environment here. And while that's logging out, I'm going to go into the analyze part of our platform where that capture that Jada just did has been posted and show you some of the outputs that we get here. So let's log in. Let's log in to this environment. We'll close down SuccessFactors for a moment. And I'm taken to something we call the capture listing. So this is just a ordered by date or ordered by whatever the filter happens to be, capture date of the captures that have been posted into the server. So in the last 30 minutes, we've only got one capture here. This tells me that I'm the only one of my colleagues doing any work at the moment, which is fine. But if we go back and look a bit further, we'll see that in our demo environment, several of my colleagues have been doing some capture activity today. So they've been going through demonstrating the capture process, and as a result, the captures are in the view here. These captures have some useful information behind them, more for sort of the QA role of a person, but we can see here the various things that I filled in and selected for that capture. I guess two of the key outputs from this are the ability to generate automation and the ability to generate process documentation. So I'm going to select my capture that I just performed here within the last 30 minutes, this one, and I'm going to request some documentation to be generated from it. So I'm going to select the create documentation button. We can template this documentation, multiple different templates to inject the document you'll see in a moment. I'm going to stick with best run because that's the company we're using for this demo. And I'm going to generate a PDF. So that's going to go off and build a PDF version of the capture that I just performed, a documented version of that capture. I'm also at the same time going to say, you know what, I'd like automation of this. So let's go and build some automation. We're going to give it a, let's just change the name. So we'll give it a, let's call it webinar, if I could spell, 2019-11-21. And we're going to build that automation. So that's going to go off and render some automation out, which we'll come and look at in a moment. Let's look at the documentation that's just been generated. Come to my documents tab. I'm filtering it just on my documents, but if we open this one up, come to the PDF that's been generated, what we'll see here is this is the template part of the document. There's a header and a footer with logos and titles and so on. But as we go down through, what you'll see is the capture engine that I had running while I performed my activity as Jada here was capturing screenshots of what I was doing as I transitioned through the various screens. It was taking screen snippets of the fields and objects that I was interacting with, and it's producing this narrative that kind of describes what I did. So I left-click the recruiting link. Here's the screen, create new, and as we go down, we'll see where I filled in Jada Baker and so on. So, you know, pretty detailed documentation of this as we go through and captured it. The user had to make no additional effort other than perform their activity, bookended by the begin and end capture. And we've got this pretty rich documentation that's come out as a result of that. So typical uses we're seeing this is sometimes used as training materials. It's sometimes used within sprints to document the end of sprint acceptance criteria. So someone will use the capture within a sprint, document the criteria that can then be associated with the user story in Jira or whatever technology is being used to manage stories and epics and so on. So number of different uses for this. But I guess the primary goal for this particular webinar was that we wanted to get to the stage where we had automation. So if you recall, I selected this particular item and said I wanted automation created. So what I'm going to do is open up, I'm going to switch into the role of more of a QA person, and I'm going to go and consume the automation that this part of our platform has just generated. So Jada effectively handed me, by performing the capture, she put it into the platform, and we've now got the ability to come into the automation side of our platform. And what I'm going to do is just go and import that automation into our platform. So imagine multiple users, almost like crowdsourcing your automation build, having multiple users out there providing you with captures. that allow you to then bring them into WorkSoft. There's our webinar process. I'm going to just drop it into the right part of the platform. So drop it in as some SuccessFactors automation and go and hit import. So while that's happening, let's go back and look at, let's go back to the presentation here and go to the sort of next stage of the demo. So we've shown how, as a business user, we can simply ask those business users to perform their activity with the capture engine running. They don't need to learn anything technical about QA or test automation. We simply deploy that very lightweight agent out onto their desktop, ask them to do their thing, to perform their activity. And the outputs we get are process documentation, which I've just showed, and some automation, which we're going to come back and revisit. So that's that kind of user story for that user covered. QA engineer. The people who are responsible for creating, maintaining, and refining the automation to make it such that it can run with different data variants and run into a period of time, they want to automate the business process. So they're going to use the automate part of the WorkSoft platform, consume the captures that have been provided by the business users, and refine those into something, into a beautiful piece of automation that can be used as part of an end-to-end, reuse with different data sets and so on. So I'm going to go back and look at the kind of how that role would pan out and how we then refactor and test out this automation. So let's come back into the platform here. And we'll see here, I've got my webinar automation. So this is now what we call a WorkSoft process. It's a piece of automation that's been captured by Jada Baker. It's made its way through the QA user, importing it into the automation part of our platform. And I'm going to go down and just show you some of the sort of steps within this. So we've got, you would have seen within the document that we produced in the discovery part of the platform, the narrative that described the sequence of steps that I performed. That same narrative carries forward into the automation within WorkSoft Certify. We've got the sequence of steps I performed to pass through the create new job requisition screen. So I click the job requisition link, I input demo user for webinar, Jada Baker, the hiring manager, and so on. So as we're filling in these fields, this is becoming part of the automation. One of the foundation principles of WorkSoft Certify is that there is no programming language required to create, maintain, and update automation. It's all very simple to understand. So from a collaboration perspective, if I now needed to go and talk to Jada Baker and understand, you know, why did you perform this particular step, or is there anything else we need to do between steps 3 and 4? Those business users can sit and look at this series of this sequence of steps and narrative and actually understand what's going on, rather than looking at code. So it's actually very simple to create, maintain, and then collaborate around with business users if necessary. But the idea is, as a QA user, I'm going to take this automation and I would be refining it by filling in, making these fields data-driven, adding in verification steps, adding in some commentary, maybe some screenshots need to be taken at various points in time. That's something that's very easy to do within Certify, and we'll be doing, and I'll show some examples of that in a moment. What I want to do is show some quick examples of the kinds of automated tests that we described earlier, the tests that Beatrix, Lufthansa described. Why test? Well, we're testing for data access issues potentially. So I've got a piece of automation here that runs a simple authorization test. It's going to log on as a particular user and it's going to attempt to access a part of SuccessFactors that, based on the role-based permissions for this role of or class of user, we shouldn't be able to access. So let's run this. I'm manually triggering the automation here for this demo. We'll get to the stage where we show this running. So Certify is now taking over and is executing this process. It's going to log on. In this case, we're going to log on, I think, as it's Jada Baker. Logging back in as Jada. Jada is going to attempt to see some of the permissions for her employees, her reports. And you would have seen very quickly there, you might have noticed it came up and said, you do not have the permission to access this area. That is the expected behavior. This is a test to ensure that Jada or that role of user cannot get into that area and see things they should not. And as a result, this has passed. we can flip this test and run it for another role and say, run this test for a different data set where we expect them to be able to do this. So a very simple example of a role-based kind of test of can I or can't I access as a particular role a piece of SuccessFactors capability. That's one example. Let's go and look at the functional test. We captured a moment ago a create job requisition. Here's a version of it that's been refined by a QA engineer, building in intelligence into it, data-driven and so on. So let's run this particular test. And what you see now is this technology, Certify, performing an automated version of pretty much what Jada Baker captured at the start of this demonstration process. So we're logging in, we're going to create a new requisition. I think this chooses a slightly different requisition. Yeah, it goes to families and roles and picks one from, yeah, it's creating a position for a retail associate. Again, Jada Baker's the hiring manager. This particular piece of automation also demonstrates some of the kind of multi-role capabilities, because what we're seeing here, if you look up at the top right, it's actually Jada who is creating this requisition. The automation is verifying that the requisition will be successfully created by looking in this table. It's also storing the requisition number that was just created. Now we're now logging in as a different user in SuccessFactors, a different best run colleague, Tessa in this case. And Tessa is going to remove the job requisition that Jada just created. So testing those different multi-role type approvals as well, but also the functionality. Can I create, can I remove job requisitions, because that is part of my job role. So there's two very quick, simple examples of automation being executed to test out those kinds of scenarios we described earlier, authorizations and also functional testing. I've got a video, just in the interest of time, I did this as a video that I'll show of a much more advanced scenario. This is a full recruitment to hiring and onboarding automation. I'm going to let it run. One of the interesting quirks of this particular piece of automation as we show it is, because there's a lot of things going on in the background, there's web service calls, there's API lookups, there's database calls. We're using our automation platform itself to bring its execution engine to the front, so that when we're demoing, we're seeing what this is doing. So the various steps that are happening, we're actually executing some web service calls to verify some zip codes. We're also automating PowerPoint behind the scenes. You'll see the screen here that says hiring process. This is a PowerPoint slide. Certify is kind of signposting where it is in this demo by bringing up PowerPoint at various stages. In this case, we're an external candidate. We're going to an application portal. We've just fired up a mobile device. Obviously, one of the things is the people using SuccessFactors today, or people using any application today, want to be able to access it in a mobile environment. So we'll be showing that as part of the demonstration, how Certify can also drive automation on mobile environments. So in this case, this is an external user. They're uploading their resume, applying for a job as a retail assistant. And this job application is going to be picked up by the Best Run team and various roles within Best Run to take that applicant through the process. So there's the applicant, he's applied for that role. Next, we're going to see Tessa basically reviewing candidates. She's going to be researching, looking in databases for, is this a past employee? So running some database searches. Again, those things are being orchestrated by the WorkSoft automation platform. They don't make for great demos running a database query, so that's happening in the background. But here we go. Here's Tessa basically is going to go through and review some of these people. She's going to make some recommendations to her hiring manager. So she's searching for a user here. And she's going to move this user from whatever status they're in at the moment to ready to hire. So she's moved this person through the process. And another user now picks up, sorry, not another user. We're still with Tessa here, providing some information and emailing some information over to one of her colleagues. So we really are exploring all those different technology integrations, technology and application uses that you would find in a typical end-to-end process that an organization would have. It's, as I said earlier, it's not just going to be SuccessFactors. There will be numerous other technologies involved in performing an end-to-end activity that will in some way involve SuccessFactors. So I'm conscious of time. We've got a few, and I want to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to start scrubbing forward a little bit through this, part of the reason why we had it as a demo. So Tess has recommended some candidates. We're now into Jada. Jada's basically out of the office and working on her iPad. So she's going to be going into and accessing SuccessFactors through the web browser on her iPad, and she's going to approve this potential hire and move them up through the process. And again, this is WorkSoft Certify automating, in this case, mobile as a user interface as part of an end-to-end process. So let's see where Jada goes. She's going to go into recruiting, I guess. Yeah. And she's going to pick up this candidate and move them into the right state to then be onboarded. So there's the colleague Rick Goad that's coming in. Hard to see what's going on often in the iPad, but you can see there he's been moved to onboarding and closing down that device. And we now move from Jada having moved this person to onboarding to Stephanie, who's a HR specialist who uses ECC and the core HR and ECC, and she's now going to go through and do a PA40 T code, I think, to onboard this person. So again, as I've said, it's not just going to be about testing SuccessFactors in isolation. It will be integrated and dependent and feed numerous other technologies. And given the periods of time involved in an adoption of SuccessFactors and using payroll, if you're already there, then this is one very good example of what you would see happening. So I'm going to kill the video there. There's just an example of some good end-to-ends. This is just Tessa going back in and actually tidying up. So we use automation to go back and reset the environment ready for the next demo by deleting the candidates, moving them back through the process to the initial start phase. So hopefully that showed a good example of execution. Now, the final thing I want to really talk about is embedding the automation. We want to make the automation available to be executed wherever it needs to be executed, whether that's part of the DevOps pipeline, something that happens overnight as part of a regular regression test. It's important that this automation is available and used as and when it's needed. You only get the value from automation when you run it. So we want to be running it as much as possible. So in this case, the quality executive has their user story. They want to be able to execute on demand. So let's go and show that kind of capability. And for the more technical amongst you, let's go to, I'm going to use as an example here, Jenkins. So we've got a very common piece of technology found in a DevOps pipeline. Azure DevOps is another alternative here, but Jenkins as a kind of CI/CD build server and orchestrator of all of those kinds of capabilities is a great example. We've got various projects within Jenkins here. I've got a project that is going to execute my builds to test out whatever I happen to have changed in SuccessFactors. So let's say we've made some configuration changes. We're deploying those into the QA instance. We need to run tests. We use Jenkins to orchestrate that process of moving those changes through the environments and then executing the tests. I'm triggering it manually from here, but I'm going to basically execute this Jenkins project, which is my SuccessFactors build. So I've just clicked on the build now. Did I? Yep, I did. I'm now building twice. So you see the build is now started. What's actually happening, if I've turned on the noise on my phone, there's volume, I'm going to go to part of our platform that allows me to kind of see what's going on load-wise in terms of execution. So let me log in here, and this basically allows me to kind of spy on the workload that is now going on. So it tells me it's running now on my platform. I can even go and actually spy into these virtual machines. We've got some resources here, some servers that are there to handle execution workload. This one is picking up, has been tasked by Jenkins, and let me zoom in so we can actually see it. This is more of a demo gimmick than anything. No one's going to sit and watch this kind of stuff. But we can see here a success factors activity being executed by our execution manager on the request of, in this case, a call from a CI/CD technology within a DevOps pipeline. So this is a very, just to keep it short, this is a simple example, log in and log off, we'll see that. But if I come back to my Jenkins environment, we'll see this is progressing nicely. The status will come back here and we'll have all of that placed back into Jenkins. So ability to run automation wherever you need to run it. There's the email telling me that that is now completed and passed. So the Jenkins status will be updated in a moment. It's going to do it again. Let's not wait for that. Let's go back to my presentation. And last slide, really, I showed that slide of Beatrix from the German airline group Lufthansa talking about why test. And she was talking at Sapphire 2019 in Orlando. She was there, and let's talk about the scale of Lufthansa as an organization doing testing. They've got 135,000 employees. Their SuccessFactors implementation impacts potentially 135,000 people. They're a global operation. They've got bases in countries where there are different employment laws. They've got numerous different subsidiaries. So they're deploying what is an incredibly large and complex SuccessFactors environment, starting with global templates, local templates changed, lots of data privacy conditions. Here's Beatrix talking about that. She was talking about why testing. Well, no surprise really, and it's a WorkSoft presentation. They are testing using WorkSoft Certify. So this very large and complex SAP SuccessFactors implementation is being tested using WorkSoft Certify.